This is a town located in the southern part of the Anzano Empire, born and developed alongside the Anzano Royal Magic Academy. The most surprising thing is that these two girls are also students of the Magic Academy, named Rumia and Sisti. While the two were on their way to school, a young man was rushing straight toward them. Sisti felt scared and used magic to blow him away. His name is Glenn, and he told them to be careful when walking outside. Sisti realized she was at fault and apologized to Glenn. Glenn saw a girl who looked exactly like someone he had met before. He started touching her randomly, which resulted in him getting blown away once more. Meanwhile, teacher Hallie complained about another teacher being late and his academic skills were only average. During the first class, the teacher arrived late. After looking at him for a moment, Sisti realized that teacher was Glenn. He simply wrote on the board and told the students to study on their own. Teacher Hallie believed he was just a gamer and questioned how he could be a teacher at such a prestigious academy. His attitude toward his students angered a witch named Celica. Celica decided to take full responsibility for her disciple and wanted him to be happy. Glenn started teaching the students, but his handwriting was so sloppy that it frustrated them. A student named Lynn wanted to ask about magic incantations, but Glenn simply said he didn't know and forced her to figure it out on her own. Sisti became furious and complained about Glenn's teaching, but no matter how much she spoke, it was useless. While the female students were changing clothes, Glenn accidentally walked into the room. He claimed it was a misunderstanding, but then deliberately continued looking, resulting in him getting slapped. Sisti still held on to her late grandfather's dream of deciphering the mystery of the angel Megalios. Unexpectedly, Glenn appeared before them. Rumia treated him kindly while Sisti was angry. He explained that he was only a temporary teacher sent by Celica, and if he refused, she would kill him because her power was too overwhelming. Naturally, Glenn continued neglecting his teaching duties. Sisti reached her breaking point and confronted him about his poor teaching methods, threatening to report him so he would be replaced. Surprisingly, he wanted that to happen. Enraged, Sisti grabbed a notebook and threw it at his face. In this magical world, that gesture was considered a formal challenge. According to the rules, if she won, he would have to teach seriously. If she lost, she would have to obey him. Glenn accepted the challenge between teacher and student with a serious attitude. The duel took place and both were only allowed to use shock magic, a defensive skill. A student battling a teacher was unheard of, but Glenn was a complete amateur, getting repeatedly attacked by Sisti. In the end, he lost, but he cowardly pretended not to understand what had happened and ran away. The next class, as expected, Glenn was lazy as ever, leaving Sisti speechless in frustration. She went to ask him about magic incantations, but she expected him to have no answer. She believed magic was a great tool for exploring existence, but Glenn bluntly stated that it was nothing more than a tool for killing. His demeaning view of magic enraged Sisti, and she slapped him before storming off. As Glenn was thinking, he saw Rumia practicing a magic circle. He realized she couldn't activate it due to a lack of mercury, so he added a little. As a result, she succeeded. Seeing her joy made him reminisce about his childhood. Rumia then refuted the idea that magic was only used for killing, arguing that it had many benefits for humanity. She shared how 3 years ago, after being exiled from her family, she lived with Sisti. During that time, she was kidnapped by evil sorcerers, but a mysterious person saved her and helped her understand that magic could be used to protect people. She wanted Glenn to apologize to Sisti because Sisti had a connection to her late grandfather, and that dream was important to her. Unexpectedly, in the next class, Glenn sincerely bowed and apologized to Sisti for everything he had done and began teaching seriously. Glenn didn't like teaching straight from textbooks, so he explained the characteristics and basic principles of using a blockboard. When handling 4 or 5 lines of magic, the firing direction would change unpredictably. By reducing the number of magic lines, surprising effects could occur when using a blockboard. His teaching style turned out to be so engaging that students from other classes came to observe. Celica felt relieved to see that her disciple was actually useful. Rumia and Sisti were also relieved to realize that Glenn was, in fact, a wonderful person. During a makeup class, Glenn was late again, but noticed someone was watching them. 2 intruders entered the classroom using military-grade magic attacks. They had come to Capo. capture Rumia but wanted to play around first. Sisti was caught by one of them, who tortured her despite her pleas. Unexpectedly, Glenn appeared but then turned around and walked away as if he didn't care. It was all a trick. The enemy attacked him with magic, but it was nullified because Glenn had used the Fool card, which sealed all surrounding magic. First 5,000 characters give me? The most unexpected thing was that one of the accomplices was killed by his own teammate. Sisti used magic to enhance Glenn's strength, allowing him to punch one of the enemies and escape. After buying some time, Sisti was finally able to use her magic and unleashed a whirlwind attack. To everyone's surprise, Glenn managed to cast an advanced spell, defeating all the remaining enemies. However, using that spell drained a huge amount of his magic power, causing him to cough up blood. Suddenly, Eric appeared, underestimating Glenn, thinking he was just a third-rate magician. Realizing that Sisti still had some magic power left, Glenn came up with a plan and pushed her down below. Rick, aware that Glenn was hiding a card that could potentially prevent magic activation, decided to activate his magic first. The moment Rick activated his spell, Glenn used his card and counterattacked, but Rick managed to block it. With no other options, Glenn had to endure Rick's attack. However, Sisti intervened and supported him. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Glenn launched a decisive strike, ultimately defeating Rick. Unfortunately, Glenn was seriously injured and could no longer continue the rescue mission. After some time, Glenn regained consciousness and rushed to save Rumia. Unexpectedly, the enemy had used 5 layers of binding magic to trap Rumia. Glenn tried to break through the barriers, but by the time he reached the 5th one, he collapsed from exhaustion. Rumia desperately reached out to him and used her healing magic. It was then revealed that Rumia possessed a unique supernatural ability known as the Amplifier. With her help, Glenn completely shattered the barriers and knocked the enemy unconscious. After the incident, Queen Alice realized that Rumia was the daughter she had abandoned 3 years ago. Meanwhile, an upcoming magic competition between different classes was announced, and Glenn wanted to help his students win. Surprisingly, he had been observing them all along and knew their potential. However, the truth was that Glenn was completely broke, so he saw this as an opportunity to win the prize money. Unexpectedly, while his students were training, another class tried to take over their practice area. Senior Hallie looked down on Glenn's class, calling them cowards and assuming their loss was inevitable. Glenn was furious at Hallie's belittling attitude and decided to wager 3 months' worth of his salary to challenge him. Surprisingly, Glenn boasted confidently, making Hallie believe his class was actually strong, so he accepted the challenge. Since he had placed such a big bet, Glenn became serious about training his students to secure victory. Meanwhile, Rumia's memories of being abandoned by her mother and saved by a mysterious person resurfaced. On the other side, the queen eagerly awaited the reunion with her daughter after 3 years and wore a different crown as a disguise. The magic tournament, organized by Queen Alicia de Tet of Albano, began. Glenn's students put in a strong effort and secured 3rd place. Their chances of winning were now higher, and Glenn felt relieved. The next competition was the endurance trial. Many students collapsed under the torture techniques, leaving only Rumia and the reigning champion. In the final stage, Rumia also fell, unable to endure the last attack. Despite the pain, she stood back up, refusing to give up. However, Glenn stepped in, worried that she would suffer further injuries. Unexpectedly, the champion fell asleep while standing, making Rumia the winner. The queen felt at peace, seeing Rumia smile brightly once more. Meanwhile, 2 individuals, Albec and Riel, were assigned to observe the imperial guards protecting the queen. Meanwhile, a young girl approached Glenn, asking him to teach her transformation magic. She felt useless and wanted to give up on the competition, but Glenn reassured her that even if she lost, no one would blame her. Glenn then transformed into Rumia to demonstrate the characteristics of transformation magic. At that moment, Sisti arrived with some homemade pastries for Glenn, but he was nowhere to be found. Glenn, who was starving, tried to take food from his students, but Rumia appeared just in time. As he was about to eat, Sisti blew him away with her magic. Rumia realized that Sisti had baked the pastries, especially for Glenn, and brought some over, saying that a mysterious person had helped her make them. While they were talking, the queen suddenly appeared, forcing Kalika to use magic to conceal her presence. Unexpectedly, it was revealed that Glenn, despite being a temporary teacher, was actually a member of the Royal Magic Corps. After 3 years apart, the queen finally reunited with her daughter. However, because she had abandoned Rumia without a word, Rumia was deeply disappointed. She claimed that the queen had mistaken her for someone else and that the real princess had died 3 years ago. Realizing that Rumia still resented her, the queen had no choice but to accept it and entrusted her to Glenn. Upon returning to the palace, the queen was suddenly captured by the captain of the imperial guards. The guards were known for their absolute loyalty to the queen, so Anne hesitated to take action. Meanwhile, Sisti noticed that Rumia hadn't returned and began to worry. But she was happy when Glenn ate the pastries she had made. Rumia, after thinking for a while, finally understood why the queen had abandoned her. She possessed a dangerous innate power that could threaten the royal family's position. Hearing this, Glenn revealed that he was once a magician in the imperial army. He also noted that the queen had always kept an important pendant hidden. Suddenly, the imperial guards appeared and arrested Rumia on charges of treason and insulting the royal family. Rumia finally understood everything and was heartbroken that the queen wanted her dead. As they prepared to execute her, Glenn unexpectedly appeared and rescued her. After contacting Celica, Glenn realized that someone was plotting to assassinate the queen, but she was unable to speak about it. Suddenly, a girl launched an attack. It was Riel. Meanwhile, during a formal meeting, Riel acted as if she wanted to kill Glenn, angry that he had left without a word. Glenn introduced her and Anbeck as magicians of the imperial army and his friends. Anbeck realized that the queen was being held hostage by the imperial guards so that the conspirators could use this opportunity to assassinate her. To save the queen, Glenn needed the help of both Riel and Anbeck. He trusted Celica's words, knowing she was the greatest magician on the continent and never lied. After the competition ended, Glenn's class won the championship. Anbeck and Riel were sent as representatives to meet the queen and receive the award, but in reality, it was Glenn and Rumia in disguise. Meanwhile, the two of them successfully tricked the imperial guards. Glenn and Celica met the queen after Celica set up a protective barrier. Glenn explained the situation to the commander and urged the queen to call off Rumia's execution. However, it seemed the queen was being forced to proceed with the execution. Glenn realized the queen was lying and that she deeply loved her daughter, even pleading with him to protect Mary at all costs. He then noticed that the queen's necklace was different from before and realized something was wrong. When he rushed forward, the commander attacked him, but the queen, aware of the situation, removed the necklace. Glenn explained that the necklace was cursed. Removing it would cause the wearer's death. The only way to nullify the curse was to kill Rumia, but since Glenn had already used his trump card, the curse failed to activate. The situation was resolved, but a spy managed to escape. Later, Rumia realized that Glenn was the one who had saved her 3 years ago, and at that moment, the queen also pleaded for his help. Glenn expected to enjoy a good meal, but instead, the kid spent all his money partying. Glenn trained with Sisti to help her improve her magic skills and protect Rumia. Meanwhile, Riel was sent to enroll as a student to safeguard Rumia, but she seemed more focused on protecting Glenn. Unexpectedly, Riel became Glenn's new student. During class, Glenn tested the students on their ability to summon lightning spirits. Riel misunderstood the instructions, drew a sword, and threw it instead, leaving everyone confused. Afterward, Glenn took the students on a trip to a famous beach resort. The kids were captivated by the beautiful scenery. Meanwhile, a disguised spy was assigned a mission. Glenn and the students explored the area, but Glenn was only interested in watching girls. They played volleyball using magic, and later that night, the boys attempted a sneaky mission into the girls' rooms. Glenn caught them and ordered them to retreat, but they refused to give up. They teamed up against him but were ultimately defeated. Glenn then went to a quiet place to relax and found 3 girls stargazing, forming a beautiful friendship. Although Riel did not understand friendship, she felt happy. Later, Glenn encountered Riel, realizing he had hurt her by leaving without a word. Riel was devastated and believed she had done everything for Glenn, even willing to risk her life. Furious that he had abandoned her, she left, reminding Glenn of a painful past memory. Afterward, Riel avoided Maxisti and Rumia, prompting Glenn to suspect something was wrong. He and the students visited the Imperial Magic Academy of Angiano, where Glenn met the head researcher, Buff. They learned that platinum magic was essential for manipulating life. The research department also worked on creating chimeras. Rumia questioned whether humans should have the right to control life. Humans could not revive the dead, but an empire had once launched Project Revealing, which aimed to resurrect people using genetic codes and alchemy. The project relied on astral code and enter ether to reconstruct souls. However, the resulting clones were imperfect, and manipulating life was considered an unforgivable act against the divine. It was revealed that North Cheese researchers had stolen and successfully replicated the project. Meanwhile, Rael continued avoiding Glenn, feeling upset about his kindness toward Rumia and Sisti. Rael then encountered a man who claimed to be her brother. Unbex discovered that an enemy faction had begun its operations, leading him to confront a high-ranking adversary. The enemy used advanced magic, but Unbex managed to block it. The enemy then summoned monsters, but Unbex quickly defeated them using lightning magic. Rael was shocked to see the man she believed to be her brother, as she thought he had been killed by the organization. The man claimed he had survived and ordered Rael to kill Glenn, calling him an obstacle to Northchee's researchers. Glenn eventually found Rael and suspected the man was an imposter. However, Rael, confused and manipulated, stabbed Glenn with a fatal blow, causing him to collapse. Unbex, realizing Glenn was critically wounded, had to handle the enemy, who then disappeared. Meanwhile, Sisti brought food to Rumia, but was horrified to find Rumia seemingly killed by Rael. However, Rumia was only unconscious and terrified. Rael was shocked to learn that Glenn had been killed, and the enemy planned to use Rumia for experiments. Unbex later met Rael and told her that in order to save Glenn, she needed to use healing magic and resuscitate him. They successfully performed the ritual and revived Glenn, proving that although Rael was just a normal girl, her magical power was strong enough to protect the princess. Unbex, after a long period of investigation, discovered that the Platinum Magic Research Institute had ties to its director. Meanwhile, Glenn was furious that they dared to use his students as test subjects. Unbex, however, couldn't intervene directly without exposing Rael's true identity. He also dismissed the notion that Rael had betrayed them, believing that her despair was caused by Glenn abandoning her without explanation. Rumia had been captured and suspended as an experiment subject. The institute's director was revealed to be a researcher from Tenershi. Glenn and Unbex identified the research facility's location thanks to a tracking chip Glenn had secretly placed on an artificial assistant. As they approached, they encountered a monstrous creation of the director. Unbex, using a powerful fire spell, swiftly defeated it. However, another, much stronger creature appeared. Glenn and Unbex combined their efforts to defeat it, astonishing even the director. When confronted, the director revealed that he had modified his body, transforming himself into a monster. Unbex assessed that he had enough power to take him down. Upon reaching the research facility, they found Rumia, who was overjoyed to see Glenn still alive. Beale, influenced by Glenn's words, engaged in combat with him. Since Glenn was unarmed, he was forced to draw his gun for self-defense. Meanwhile, Glenn demanded that Rael reveal the name of her brother, but she couldn't recall it. Seizing an opportunity, Glenn used gravity magic to restrain her and successfully rescued Rumia. The imposter then admitted his deception, revealing that Rael's real brother was named Cyan. Venner had once created a clone of Lucia and named her Rael. Cyan had attempted to leave the organization, but he was betrayed and killed. Glenn had met Cyan before and knew that if the organization continued its cloning experiments, their influence would grow unchecked. The imposter had created 3 clones and ordered them to kill Rael. Although Rael was a mere clone, she was still Glenn's student, and he refused to let her die. Regaining her composure, Rael fought back and defeated all 3 clones. Glenn, having the upper hand, prevented the imposter from using magic by holding a trump card. With a cold, lethal gaze, he aimed his gun at the enemy. However, because Rumia was present, he chose to knock him out instead. The director was also taken down in the aftermath. Following the incident, Rael reintegrated with her peers, much to Glenn's relief. Meanwhile, a subordinate conversed with a mysterious entity, revealing that their true plan was to use Rumia as an experiment subject. Rael, feeling remorseful, apologized to Rumia and Sisti, who bore no grudges. Elsewhere, Glenn was teasing Sisti, making her blush. A sophisticated man named Leo arrived at the academy as a new instructor, recognizing Glenn as a rare and talented teacher. Harley was thrilled about the addition of such a skilled educator. During the next lesson, Glenn was impressed by Leo's ability to teach complex concepts in an easily understandable manner. However, Glenn was deeply concerned about the students' incomplete mastery of block-bone magic, which could have lethal consequences. Later, Sisti and Leo took a walk together, but Glenn, at Rumia's insistence, secretly followed them. Leo proposed to Sisti, but she declined, as she was committed to fulfilling her late grandfather's dream. To uncover the mysteries of the angel Melgallius, she needed to continue her studies in magic. Realizing he couldn't make her abandon her dream, Glenn met with Leo, and Sisti unexpectedly declared Glenn as her fiancé. Both men were shocked, and Glenn played along, convincing Leo that Sisti was his bride-to-be. Challenging Leo to a competition, Glenn decided to form a magic battle squad with his students. Meanwhile, Unbex received news that the dust of the Celestials had been stolen, requiring further investigation. The battle rules stated that the team that captured the enemy's base or defeated their commander would win. Leo was confident in his victory and aimed to claim Sisti for himself. The match between the two classes began, with Leo teaching his students a strategy involving 3 squads pressing the enemy. Glenn recognized the danger of this tactic in real battle, where there were no true heroes. Leo then commanded a close-range assault. However, Glenn had already prepared his students for such scenarios, allowing them to counter effectively. Surprised, Leo shifted to long-range attacks, but he was unaware that Riel was part of the opposing strategy. Running out of options, he resorted to his final strategy, ordering his troops to retreat into the forest. Glenn anticipated this and had set traps across the battlefield, leading to both teams being evenly matched. Frustrated, Leo insisted that they would have won if they had followed his strategy. Determined to win Sisti over, Leo continued his pursuit. Glenn accepted his challenge, but Sisti, furious, slapped Glenn and stormed off. That night, she confronted Glenn, seeking the truth. Glenn revealed that she reminded him of Sarah, someone dear to him from his days in the Imperial Army. Despite the bloodshed of his missions, Sarah had always supported him, fueling his dreams. Suddenly, Leo appeared, condemning Glenn for training students despite his bloodstained past. Enraged by the insult to his history, Glenn prepared to fight, but Leo's martial skills were formidable. Unexpectedly, Leo revealed his ability to use Tonpa magic, allowing him to create objects from his imagination. Sisti realized he was two-faced and was forced into an engagement with him. In the aftermath, Glenn disappeared from the academy. Sisti, feeling powerless, reluctantly accepted the engagement to avoid confrontation. However, during the wedding ceremony, Glenn made a dramatic return, throwing a smoke bomb and abducting Sisti in a daring rescue. He had spent time strategizing and preparing weapons like a true special operative. Sisti soon realized that Leo never loved her. His real intention was to use her for experiments. Suddenly, celestial dust creatures appeared, and Glenn's demeanor shifted. Engaging in battle, he once again bloodied his hands. Leo was exposed as an imposter, a former executioner number 11 of the Royal Mage Special Forces named Giathis. His goal was to seize the Akashic Records, a power capable of dominating everything. After contemplating her choices, Sisti decided to fight alongside Glenn and urged him to return to the academy. With a surprise attack, she used high-speed magic to weaken the enemy, and Glenn exploited the opening to strike. However, Giathis summoned the Holy Maiden. Immediately, Sisti unleashed a powerful kick, toppling the summoned entity, while Glenn knocked out the imposter. Giathis disappeared after his defeat, and Glenn returned to his students, resuming his role as their teacher.